All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you all for coming. It's 1 o'clock. We'll go ahead and get started now. Thank you to the doorman who's counted you all twice, so our attendance numbers are way up over last year. Thank you, sir. Good job. Karaoke starts in about 30 minutes. We'll get through the boring stuff. Yeah. I'm not starting that one, though, man. That's not happening. We're really doing dirty performance tuning. That's what's happening today. All right. So anyways, my name is Bob Morielli. We're going to be talking about clean performance tuning today. I have the tuning school and tuning labs that I work on daily, so I'm the president and the founder of those, and I'm also honored to be a part of the SEMA Emerging Trends and Technologies Network. That's a mouthful. Thank you, Rob. Rob heads it up. So a quick note on that. If you guys want to be an active participant in steering the industry, all you need to do is Google those words. Emerging Trends and Technologies Network. You can join any of the SEMA networks. It's absolutely free. And the people that show up help to steer the industry. So if you often feel like I did, where I felt like I was an outsider looking in and things just kind of moved down the river, that's how you have to do it. It costs you nothing but your time. And the way leadership works, and Rob can attest to this, is if you show up and you say, hey, I'd like to help with the industry, we will absolutely help put you into a position where you can, be a part of that. So ETTN is the abbreviation, and it's fantastic. So that is me in a nutshell. And of course, the obligatory attorney slide that I'm going to read to you very slowly now, okay? The views and opinions, no, I'm not doing that. The views and opinions, blah, blah, blah. So if you want to read this, you can. But the nuts and bolts of this say that this is not necessarily the opinion of PRI, probably smart, and then also could be devoid of any good advice. I don't know if you've read that from far away, but that could be real. We'll find out later in the sessions. But yeah, that's pretty much the disclaimer, okay? We got a little agenda here today. So we're going to talk about what is clean performance tuning. That'll be a couple minutes there, probably 10 minutes worth. Who should care and why? Like, why should I actually care? By the way, thank you all for being here, which means you actually care. So that's a good thing. But who should actually care and why? And then how can you minimize or reduce your exposure? Maybe you're doing parts and packages or tuning. We'll go over tuning principles, a few things like that. It'll be about 20 minutes worth. And then what programs can you participate in that will help to also reduce your exposure? So before I go into the next slide, I like to figure out who I'm talking to. So I'm going to give you guys 5 categories you could potentially be in, okay? There's 5 potential things. So when I say the first thing, do not raise your hand. Wait until later after I complete the 5th thing, okay? All right. So the first thing is, if you're in the crowd and you are a tuner, that's an option. Don't raise your hand, okay? Option 2, shop owners. Option 3, parts manufacturers. You make anything custom for the cars. Enthusiasts, that's option 4. And number 5 is EPA agents, okay? That's going to be our 5th. I'm not starting with that, but there are about 200 people that want to meet you afterwards, if you are. So, all right, so if you are a tuner and you're in the crowd, that's your primary thing. Could you just raise your hand for me? 14, 24, 38. Okay, good. All right. Shop owners. Are there shop owners in here? Performance shop owners. Okay, so it's about a 50-50 split. Anybody here make parts? Parts manufacturers. Okay, awesome. And then enthusiasts. I just like to work on my own car. Awesome. Very good. Cool. Thank you. That helps me to figure out who we're talking to today. I have something for each of you in our talk today. So before we get into each of those things, let's talk about what we're talking about here, which is clean performance tuning. Clean performance tuning is really something that happens when a shop or a tuner can show reasonable basis that they have not grossly increased the vehicle's emissions through working on the vehicle. That means parts, that means tuning, and what that really means is, for example, a C7 Corvette comes into your shop, and when it's done, it doesn't leave worse than when it came in. Okay, that's a part of what we're talking about when we say reasonable basis, a part of it. It doesn't necessarily mean that you took something and it was incredibly bad to begin with and you just didn't make it any worse. That's a little bit different. We'll get into that a little more later. But basically what it means is, as a car comes in, you as the shop or the tuner should be able to look at it, test it, and then tune it or do whatever you want to do with it, and then send it on its way clean, which is kind of a weird concept. But if you look, who's doing that these days? There are manufacturers doing that these days. Like Dodge, for example. They can make a Hellcat, make 700 horsepower, and somehow the catalytic converters are happy, right? And so you see people like OEMs doing it, which means that we can absolutely do it because we usually take their stuff and make it better. So there's a way to do this. So I'm going to give you some more examples a little bit later, but this definitely applies to any modern street vehicle, not race vehicle, that you modify or tune. And so this is a concept that we use when we talk to shops. And the reason we use this concept when we talk to shops is because we're trying to look out for you, to help you understand that when something comes in, you may not necessarily want the exposure of putting a T-Rex cam in that thing and sending it on its way. Maybe that's more of a race car thing, because the way that it used to be versus the way it is today, you don't need the T-Rex cam to make the power you want to make. You can absolutely do what you want with a smaller cam and like maybe a pound or two more boost. But we'll get into that a bit later. So who should care and why? So we talked a little bit a minute ago about who's in the crowd, but the street and strip performance shops, those are what I would call really high levels that really need to be caring. Tuners, absolutely. And the custom auto parts manufacturers, so anything you do having to do with the engine, so maybe you make a cold air intake or something for the exhaust or whatever, those are the people who really need to care. That's basically everybody. It's everybody that's here. We all do need to care, but the real question is why? Cartman. Because Cartman, okay? So Cartman will knock on your door. And you guys you had to have watched South Park when you were a kid, right? You do, thank you. All right. So Cartman will knock on your door and he will say, "You will respect my authority." That was my best impression for 20 years of this. Okay. So, by the way, this is the reason PRI had me put a disclaimer on slide 2. Pretty sure of that one. So here's what can happen is that as you get bigger, which inevitably happens with your business, your exposure grows because you're out there getting marketing from it. And unfortunately, the EPA has named the sources of mobile pollution as a primary objective that they're trying to get rid of for about a 4-year period. So that's a huge portion of our industry, right? And so the issue here is you have some problems. You don't have a very well-defined system that will help you to say, I'm not a gross polluter. Because when we talk to shops, and at the tuning school, we talk to a lot of performance shops, and we've helped guide a couple of them through this process, and it's not good, it's painful. But what they'll do is they'll show up at your door, and they've hired about 200 new agents to do this, look around and see what's going on, and they're looking on Facebook. And so if you're out there making, rolling coal, don't do that. You're just attracting bad attention to your shop, okay? But what they're going to do is they're going to show up at your door, and they're going to say, "Hey, we're here, and prove to us you're not a gross polluter." And so it's like a game that you don't know how to play, because it's like playing baseball without the rules. How do I, right? So my point is, the reason you should care is that enforcement is definitely on the rise, and we know that we can make the power without having to use the T-Rex cams and all the craziness of the past. You're really just not bored enough to make the government like your new best friend. Okay, so that's something you want to try and avoid. So what can you do to minimize your exposure? So I narrowed it down into performance shops and tuners. We're going to start with you guys there. And this is really for the performance shops, although often we have tuners on staff there. So we recommend that you put your customers into one of 3 categories. And so the first category is going to be race only. Race only is pretty obvious. It means it came in on a trailer. You got a picture of it coming in on a trailer. It looks like a race car. It's not just like Jim's Mustang that he put on, right? And then you did your work, you took your photo, and here's the really important stuff. From the experience that we've had walking shops through when they deal with this stuff, if they show up and you don't have any documentation, it's an open book, which you don't want to have. What you want to have is a book that says, well, yeah, absolutely, I know you can get my records, I know you can look through all this stuff, but at the same time, I've done a good job, I'm being a good steward of making sure that what we're doing isn't creating more pollution. And that really goes really far when you're talking to people who are looking for problems that you may be creating. So think of it this way. There's an old school approach of putting your head in the sand. And you're like, oh man, I hope it never happens to me. And if it does, I'm completely hosed because I have no documentation showing what I've been doing. That is a terrible approach, and it works very badly, and it turns out badly. So if that's you today, it's okay, but start fresh tomorrow. Make it a clearly dividing point that in my business, we came back from SEMA or PRI, and we heard some talks about this stuff, and we learned that this was a problem, and guess what we started doing? We started doing it different. We started just taking pictures and knowing that the cars that had to get the T-Rex cams, They were on a trailer, and they were clearly a race car. In that case, that goes with what can you do? Pretty much you do what you want with a race car, because the emissions profile of a race car is very slim. That's not the issue here. And that's really not what I think they're after. Number two, that's another category. There's 3 categories. Second one's going to be emissions exempt. So that means, did the car come with any emissions from the factory? So probably a 60s car or whatever. Those are good bets to work on, because you can do a lot of things with those without having to do any real work. Number 3, and this is the problem, because you know what they are. It's the street cars and trucks. And so this is what I think they're really looking for. And the problem is, that is a huge portion of the industry. Like, a lot of us service street cars that just get some more performance, right? And you have a very hard time showing in your binder that this street car is actually a race car. Make sense? That's where the problem is. And so what we want to do is we want to make sure that if they knock on your door, you can absolutely pull out some books and say, well, you know, only the big stuff goes into a race car. I have proof of that. And we have absolutely some evidence. Number 2, this stuff was old, so it really didn't matter because it was emissions exempt. And number 3, my street cars, I did something that helped me to know that I wasn't necessarily creating a problem when the car left, that it wasn't worse than when it came in. And so what do those things mean? What are they? How could that be applied? So as a performance shop and also some tuners, we're going to look at this from the perspective of what you're doing. So Whipple is a good example. ProCharger a good example. If you're a shop, consider making consistent packages and then use these packages. So like, for example, if you're a GM shop, look at some of the more successful, we'll call them successful. I don't know if they really are, but successful shops tend to do what with their parts? When you come in, Rob here brings me his new his C7 Corvette, and he says, I want a lot more power. There's 2 types of shops that'll answer that question. One is going to say, sure, I can make you this custom this, and I can do that. The other type of shop is going to say, well, sir, we have a turnkey package. It's the 600 horsepower package. In the 600 horsepower package, we guarantee you're going to make 600 because we have that package and we replicate it all the time. And so in order to help reduce or minimize your exposure, using consistent packages not only does that, but it also reduces your labor time, because you're not over there grinding a custom cam just for one guy. And then when you get it on the dyno, it doesn't tune worth a crap and you can't figure out why. And the more successful shops that tend to grow tend to do this. And so what they'll do is they say, well, you know, Rob, you're a little crazy. We're going to give you an 800 horsepower package. We know it's good. Now, here's the catch. You know it's good. What does that really mean? That means that you probably had to buy parts with EOs, which is tough but doable. A lot more EOs are out and about now. Guys like ProCharger, Whipple, whatnot, you can buy a whole package, and now you've installed something that 100% covers your butt. Now, what do I mean by that? So Rob comes in. He says, I'd like, you know, maybe 600 at the tire. And we say, sure. ProCharger makes kit, adds 220 horsepower. That should put you right there, sir. So how does that occur? Well, the guys at ProCharger or Whipple went through the trouble of taking their product, sending it out to SEMA Garage, and getting it tested. But here's the thing that you have to understand about parts that have an EO. You can't mix and match. Because when they sent that part to get tested, that means it has this supercharger with these injectors and this tune. And they tested all those items together, and they said, yeah, absolutely, 100%. Here's your EO. Executive order says you are clean, you're good to go. That's great for us. It just means for you, you now have an option of something that's very plug and play. Is there anybody out here that wants to make more money in their business with less drama, with different parts that probably came from, I don't know, maybe China or eBay or something, right? And so if you're tired of banging your head against the wall and you also want to minimize your exposure, this is a great way of doing it. Go to those people's websites. They have them. They're literally listed now. And you can say, cool, I want this. It has the tune. It has the injectors. It has blah, blah, blah. Everything I need is a package. It'll definitely cover me on the way out the door, and I've cataloged it, which means when you put it on the car, you did the same thing I talked about in the last slide. You took your pictures, you said, this is my EO, this is what went with that car. I know for sure the shop owner, didn't have a problem. And judging from experience, from shops that we've helped go through this process, the shops that have that level of detail, good record keeping, guess what happens? The people on the other end who are looking to do enforcement on you, they're not really that bored. What they're looking for They want like a pie. They want something simple. They want to walk in and be like, like when they leave, they want to have a beer because of what they found in your shop. Because you didn't even bother to try and do anything to try and make sure that you were compliant. Does that make sense? So the guys that don't care about this, they do one project every 6 months. That's fine. You have no real exposure. Okay. It's not great. But the guys that do care about this are the people that are running family businesses. A couple employees, and you want to protect that. And so the best bet that we can tell you is to grab parts that have EOs, put them together, and then if the customer really wants to go bananas and go further, you have to decide, is that worth your liability? What's the current fine for everyone? $25,000? More than that? $50,000? $75,000? Is that worth it to you? So that he can go from $650 at the tire to $675? Probably not. But at the same time, you can make a couple packages using EO'd parts that you know work well every single time. You make more money, quicker installs, everybody's happy, and you're running a clean business. It's not impossible. It's absolutely a lot more doable because as enforcement has gone up, the people that make these parts are doing all the R&D for you, and they're getting them EO'd. The only thing is, and I think this is a problem for GM guys. I'm a GM guy. This is a problem. What's the first thing anybody does to a C6 Corvette? Cam. You hit the magic word right there, right? Cam and headers. It's worth 60 horsepower, right? GM guys now immediately have a problem. Now, we have solutions for it, and I'll get to that in a couple of minutes, but compare it to a Ford shop. Ford shop, you got a 5.0 Coyote. How many of those guys go straight to a cam? 5%, right? What does that mean for you as a shop that's trying to follow a clean outcome here? It means that all you're doing to them is what? Most Coyotes are getting a supercharger. The guy's happy. He's making $650 at the tire. Done. So in that case, for your Ford shop, your route to compliance and a clean outcome and to have very little liability is very simple. The GM shops have the roughest time. The Dodge guys are somewhere in the middle. And I'm kind of a Dodge guy too. So my Challenger does not have a cam. My Challenger does have a ProCharger. And guess what it has? It has an EO. Guess what? It'll make $650 to $750 at the tire based on how much boost I put out. So this is not a bad thing. We've got to get out of this mindset that what we are moving towards as an industry is bad. What we're moving towards as an industry is actually making you more money, more efficient, and hopefully you understand that there are things you can and cannot do. Now, let's say that's not good enough for you, because there's always going to be some people who are like, no, that's not good enough. My customers want this, right? I get that. But we're going to walk you through some programs that can help you if you're in that category. We'll get to that point in just a minute. All right, tuners. Ha ha, tuners. I've been looking for a way to shamelessly plug my C6 forever. It's pretty awesome. Love my car. I've completely ruined the wrap now because I race it. Don't ever waste money on that if you're gonna road course your Corvette. So here's the deal, tuners. If you're looking for a way to get in trouble, when they knock on your door and they pull the tune files off your laptop, this is how you do it. Delete everything you can. It's a terrible idea. Don't do that. Okay? Here's what you go through. As you go through the process for getting an EO or go through a reasonable basis testing process and you talk to the people that actually know what they're doing with this and actually get them and they've dealt with CARB, they always tell you the same thing. Even on cars that go through a CARB EO process, the tune may have a problem, but they don't disable the test. So forever what we've done, we as an industry have done, is said, well, I put the car together, I broke it in, and I got these codes. And what's the worst tuners on earth? What are they going to do? They turn off the codes. And then what does that do? It gets you in trouble, it gets the software guys in trouble, the whole chain collapses. So my point is, don't disable, you actually need to tune. And if you ask the people who make the rules and regulations, they're going to tell you, well, if you're running into a problem, you need to raise the threshold so you don't run into a problem. I'll give you an example of that. Cat overtemp protection, exhaust manifold protection. Heard somebody laughing in the back. They probably know what we're doing here. Here's the thing. Sometimes you could take an EcoBoost Mustang. You can run a bunch more boost, can't you? I mean, it's a tiny little turbo, so eventually it gives up and yells, I'm sorry. However, until that point, you can trip these. Why? Why are they being tripped? Y'all tune EcoBoost? Someone here has tuned an EcoBoost Mustang before. You're making a lot more heat, right? Right? So here's the problem. Most of your tuners are, what are they going to do? They go, well, I got this code. It's a PO, whatever. And so I'm going to turn it off when I send the guy home. I don't want him to come back. That's not good. Quit doing that. So if you're a tuner who doesn't want to deal with the drama of one day if they knock on your door, because one day they might, and they pull your files, you want to make sure that what they're pulling is reasonable, and you have a reasonable explanation for what you did there. And you can say, well, in this case, what else could we do? If we're running into this problem, and I don't want to disable routines, what could I do? You could raise them. You could raise thresholds. Now, keep one thing in mind. What is the catalyst? What is it classified as? It's an emissions device. Not only are you not allowed to remove it, you're also not allowed to do what to it? Make things that'll screw it up faster. It has to last. I think the manufacturer's warranty is like 80,000 miles on them. So you have to be reasonable with what you are doing. I know it's not exciting, but you can make it happen. And that's how you stay out of trouble with that if you're one of the people doing good tuning, you're trying to make the best of what you have. Now, here's the deal. There's a couple of more paths that you can take if this isn't enough for you and you want to do more, which I don't think is most of us, but if you really want to go down the path, you can do more. So the question is, what other programs are available to you that'll help you for long-term success? So there's one that we've worked on. There's stuff that SEMA's worked on. I'm going to explain them both, and I actually think that there's a place for each of them, okay? So the end of line testing, that's what we call tuning shops, performance shops. You're at the end of the line. You can do what we said earlier. You can get EO parts, plug them in, have a good day. You got no problems. You've done your job. If that's not good enough for you and you really want to customize stuff, you're going to have to take a step. Do you guys remember about 1992, there was a big hubbub in the performance shop world? Probably not, unless some gray-haired guys might remember this. The problem was chassis dynamometers were starting to get popular. Back then, that was like nobody had them, and so back then everybody did what? They just put parts on, they bought it from a catalog, and they're like, yeah, this added 30 horsepower, and go. I don't ever want to see you again. And then the transition in the industry started happening to where people started buying dynamometers. And then the shops that didn't have them got pissed at the guys that had them, because then they could prove that they weren't really making power. So here's the deal. This is another 1992 moment. Now, how many shops here have a dynamometer? Everybody that raised their hand pretty much raised their hand now. You all pretty much have a dynamometer. What that means is you are capable of taking the next step. And what that really means is if you want to go the custom route, that, man, those EOs aren't good enough, I need to do some custom work, or I just like doing custom tunes on stock vehicles, that's also a good route. The equipment that we have available these days is no longer $500,000, $1 million, or $3 million, which is the stuff you can get an EO with, but that's really not what you're after. What you're after is reasonable basis. So what that means is you can test a car as it comes in, and let's assume someone before you hasn't put a T-Rex cam in it, okay? Let's assume it's fairly stock. You test it, the car makes the emissions that it's supposed to make. Now guess what you just did for yourself? You created a baseline. The equipment, the test procedure, the third-party auditing that they say you have to have, that's what we do. And so you really shouldn't try and self-certify by saying, I went and bought a 5-gas, or I went and bought a smog machine. When they knock on your door, that's not going to be good enough for them. How do we know? We spent years talking to them about this. So they're looking for a third party, and that's what we've built. And the reason we've built this is so that our customer base doesn't erode. So we have skin in the game. We want to make sure you can still do what you love. And so you can take your vehicle, say you've got a stock F-150. We have several examples from our equipment back at the shop at home. And local guys, they make great F-150 tunes for stock F-150s. So what did we do? We used our equipment. It goes with our chassis dyno. We recorded it on stock. And guess what? It was well within the stock parameters of what it should put out. Our system told us that. Then they did their tune. Then what did we do? This is really simple. We retested it, right? And now we know that guy has a reasonable basis to say, hey, guess what? I tested my stuff. It's pretty good. And I know that it's not going to cause me problems down the road. Now, if that guy's really smart, he just took that as a first step. Why? Why did he do that? It's the first step. He can then take that and go, I know my tune has a really good chance of passing if I want to get an EO. So think of this as a path for everybody that wants to sell 10,000 tunes. Like the most popular tuning shops that sell mail order tunes are doing thousands of them every month. Think of that in a positive way, not just liability, because now you've erased liability, because this is a path for you to say, listen, I already did the testing, and if they knock on your door before you got your EO, I already did the testing, and I'm in line for an EO. That goes way further than it does if you're like, hey, I don't know, I just write tunes, And I do about 3,000 of them a month, and each one of them is going to cost me, I don't know, $500 when they find me. You see where we're going with this? Our goal is to give you opportunity to not have to be so worried about your exposure. So, something else you can do is you can test for others in the area who also have similar situations before and after testing. Next, let's say you are a parts manufacturer. You make a cold air intake, you make whatever you want. SEMA Certified is a brand new program also, and it's fantastic. Why is it fantastic? Because we realized, well, I'm not SEMA, so I can't say we, but they realized that it was cost ineffective. Let's say you make 10 cold air intakes a month. You know how hard that is to get EO'd? What's the average cost on getting an EO for something like that? What do you think, Rob?
About 8 to 10 grand, and then $1,000
So 10, 12 grand, and then you got to wait while the process hammers out. It's not a terrible thing, but if you're only making 10, maybe not a good thing. The difference is SEMA Certified works off of reasonable basis, which you've heard a couple times today, and it's fantastic. So you can use SEMA Garage Detroit, which is brand new and opening. You can use Diamond Bar California. The tests are inexpensive, and you do not have to wait on an EO process. Now, you could then say, take me all the way through to an EO, because now you're selling a lot of parts. Have you all noticed some of the trends? Anybody here work around like warehouse manufacturer type, Turn 14, Summit Racing, eBay, Amazon? You've seen announcements from them, haven't you? What are their announcements? And these guys are mega. They're huge. Like, they're WDs. They're not going to sell. Why? You see where we're going with this? I want to take this time to help change your mind and go, yeah, that's terrible, right? That's the past. But what is that also for some entrepreneurial people? See, there's opportunity there. Because now you can go out and say, yeah, I noticed Amazon quit selling these cold air intakes, or eBay did, or whoever, because nobody wants to do an EO. But these are avenues to go get an EO. And if you don't want to go that road, SEMA Certified will say, yeah, you have reasonable basis. Go ahead and start selling it. This is a good thing. I mean, I'm not up here selling Doritos, but it's a good thing, right? You actually have options. So this same conversation 2 years ago had a very different tone. The tone 2 years ago was, if you're making parts, the only thing you can do is an EO, and that's going to cost you a crap ton of money and time, and hopefully you get it, because you had no way of even knowing if it would pass before it got there. And now you have programs that can help you to make sure it gets there. So if you're selling larger volumes, consider going straight to the EO. Congratulations, you have successfully completed my spiel this morning. You did it. Good job. I don't have any donuts to throw at you, but I do have Q&A time set up. So what I'd like to do is invite you guys to come on down. There's the karaoke mic there, okay? We talked a little bit about shop owners and shops. We talked about tuners, and we talked about parts manufacturers. There are solutions for each of you to minimize your exposure. I know you got questions. There's always somebody with a question. And then there's like 5 more, because nobody wants to be the first person. Thank you for being first, sir. Just make sure it's easy, okay?
I think so.
All right.
All right, so you mentioned there was an opportunity for a pre-test of sorts that you guys have put together. You mentioned not getting your own 5-gas, so it sounds like you've got something between that and AVL lab equipment. What specifically is that?
Sure. So that's equipment we've developed for like years with the manufacturer. We can actually, after we get off here, you can go down to the tuning schools booth, or you can just look up tuninglabsinc.com, and we can actually send you the full specs on the machine. So it is not lab grade, but it is not a crappy little, 5-gas wannabe thing either, to the point that a lot of municipalities, can't say that word right, use it. And I think you will have no issues with that particular type of equipment, given what we're trying to do, reasonable basis.
Okay.
So good question. Is there a part 2?
I'll do a follow-up since there isn't anybody clamoring.
There's 4
right
more behind
me.
you. You can't see them.
Since you mentioned it's something that used to be used, a a lot of those older systems don't necessarily have the resolution to measure small amounts of NOx common on something like a Lev 3 vehicle or something like that.
Sure.
Like what scope of vehicles can be tested with that unit and give you a good idea of where you're at?
Yeah, you can do anything all the way up through current with it.
Cool.
You'll be reasonably confident there. That's a good thing. Thank you. Good questions. Come on down. I should just give people donuts for asking questions. I can get a lot more questions that way.
Talking about the GM guys, say there's a lot of DIY.
Say that again.
There's a lot of DIY.
Like, yeah, GMs.
So,
yeah.
to save yourself, would you have to have them come in and test it before they make the modifications? Or what do you do there? That's kind of a tricky situation.
All right, so there's this line, right? You don't really want to cross the line. So let's say you get the car in. Hopefully they haven't done anything crazy to it before it comes in for testing. That's really where the hang-up is for GM cars, because a lot of guys have already done a heads cam or something crazy, right? So they come in and they're a gross polluter. You don't have the ability with reasonable basis to say, well, I didn't really make it any worse. It was already crappy.
Yeah.
What you technically should do in that situation is get it a lot better, truly better, by putting something reasonable in it and then making clean power from there. That's the problem with GM guys. Nobody wants to hear it. You can still have a decent cam, but it can't be T-Rex. And that's up to you guys as you get, and that's why I said earlier about packages, right? Mm-hmm. If I'm in your shoes, I'm going to absolutely get some packages together and test them so that I don't have to wonder if the next cam that comes in is going to pass or not.
Yeah, and we have packages. We just need to get them tested. That way
Correct. Yeah.
Say we bought from the tuning labs, would you say test the car, see what that is, and then you would improve it, is what you're saying?
Yeah, the goal is always to get a baseline, right?
Yep.
Your baseline should be pretty close to what it should put out for its age and its mileage. There's charts for that. The system will tell you, are you passing or failing to begin with? And then you would do your work to the vehicle. You still, and this is the important thing, you still cannot violate like the red line. You can't go over the red line, which is like, oh, well, I somehow got it to pass even though I turned off the rear O2s. That's not passing, right? So you still have to work within the confines of keeping all the systems operational, which is totally doable with any of today's components that you want to buy to make the power you want to buy. You can absolutely do that. So the goal is to say, yeah, this thing didn't pollute to begin with. It wasn't terrible. There's a 10% window. I didn't go outside that 10% window.
Okay.
Yeah,
cool.
And that's why I keep saying, like, if you want to make money and minimize your time,
Packages.
bundle, make packages, because you know for sure that cam 9 times out of 10 is going to have no problem passing, and if it doesn't pass, there's a problem with that car.
Yeah.
And we've tested stock like Jeep Grand Cherokees that have failed. Like it was my mom's. This was a good example, right? My mom's stock Grand Cherokee 5.7 failed. Why? The secondary O2 was bad. Didn't even know it. It hadn't even set a code. Yeah. Point is, the equipment's reasonable. Cost-wise, you're looking at about the equivalent of a dynamometer, so around 60 grand. You don't have to front that all. You can finance it. Our program's relatively inexpensive.
I just blanked with the question, but I'll remember it and I'll
You're
come
fine.
down to the booth.
No worries. Thanks for coming up. All right, come on down. We need some elevator music or something. Or some kick-ass music. Like if you walked up to the mic and it was like kick-ass music, that'd be awesome.
Hoping I don't trip.
We doing AC/DC?
So I didn't fit in any of your categories.
Oh, crap.
But,
There's a fourth category?
yeah,
Nobody
yeah.
told me this.
Actually, I'm from the University of Alabama, and we have a emission lab. But when you were talking, I was kind of thinking, and this might be a stupid question, but is there a market for products that reduce emissions to give you more leeway with your other products?
It's not a bad question. So I can't give you a good answer on that, but I can tell you this. What the enforcement side's looking for is people that make things worse. So anything you're going to do to put things better just speaks to the outcome. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I do think that could be good. We did have a case where a guy did some testing, raised the compression, did some other internal engine mods, and actually ended up even cleaner than it was stock. And so that does give you more leeway. You really just can't go outside those bounds. So it's not a bad thought.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Now I have to add a fourth category. If I ever do this talk again, that's a problem. Oh, that's good. All right, what other questions y'all got? Now you got something. No? There's no other GM guys in here that are freaking out about the cams now? It's all right, man. It's all right. You know what? That's what cam design's about. You can absolutely get to where you want to be. You just don't need to get a giant cam to do it.
That's the first thing all GM guys ask for.
It is.
Chop. I want chop.
I want the chop. Hey, you know what though? You can make stock cam chop. There's a lot of what do you call those? Like ghost cam tunes floating around. Stock cam. Spark Advance at idle goes plus 40 minus 40, plus 40 minus 40.
Is that gonna pass your test?
Heck no, it's not gonna. I can't fix that one for you, man. But you could absolutely do the other stuff. Blowers with EOs, blowers without EOs. Do your own stuff. Buy a tuner kit from a Pro Charger. Put your own package together. I mean, we did ours, our Challenger, our 6.4 Scat Pack, after I blew up the bottom end, like every Dodge guy does. 15 minutes into testing, put a new bottom end in it. I had data from before, I had data from after, and with or without the EO, I was still clean. So it still had the same outcome. So it's all reasonable at that point. But that's good, awesome. No Ford guys have questions? There's always at least one Ford guy in the crowd. No? Cam phasers? Nothing? No cam phaser problems? Dodge guys, Ringlands, we can talk about all of them. We're good here. All right, guys, before you go, if you could please do me a favor, on the backs of those chairs, take a snap of it and fill out the little survey and tell them we didn't suck, all right? Thank you guys for coming. Appreciate y'all.